I'm Warren Patterson, and this is the Mt Balaker podcast.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning into the Mt Balaker podcast. For extra credit, please subscribe, like, and encourage at least 3 to 5 friends to do the same. Today's guest is an entrepreneur, CEO, father, husband, and a proponent of climbing to new heights. Please welcome Warren Patterson to the program. How you doing, Warren?
Good. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you because we were fortunate enough to have your wife, Danielle, and she gave me some background on you, Warren. And I understand when you were about 13 years old, your family had a pretty significant move. Can you talk to us about what that was?
Sure. So I was born in South Africa, in Johannesburg, in South Africa. Lived there for the first 13 years of my life. My dad was doing business in the States. He worked for Cadbury's chocolates, and most Americans know Cadbury just because of the chocolate eggs, but it's a much bigger brand. And so he was doing business here in the States, and knew that the opportunities for my brother and I were going to become limited, as they have done. The nature of the beast. A lot of my friends have left South Africa, and so we moved over here when I was 13. He continued to do business over here, and yeah, talk about a culture shock.
Yeah, I mean, but I want to dive into the culture shock, but Cadbury, that's fascinating. I mean, yeah, I remember the Easter eggs, the kind of the ooze, the kind of fake yolk, but I loved them as a kid. What was your favorite Cadbury candy?
There was Cadbury Crunch as a really good chocolate bar, and other let's see, like just their dairy milk chocolate is really, really good. So you're kind of spoiled when you have that much good chocolate laying around the house as a kid. So yeah, you get to be maybe a little bit of a chocolate snob at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Like my kids are 8 and 11, and they're going to be very jealous that I know someone whose father worked at a chocolate factory. I bet you were really popular with the, when you were a kid, did they hit you up for goods from Cadbury, or how did that go?
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
So your father's at Cadbury. He was doing a lot of business in the States, and then you come here. What are your first memories of kind of moving across the pond, so to speak?
Well, I think your brain has a natural way of normalizing things. So what you spend the first couple of months doing when you immigrate to a country like this is you kind of look for all of the commonalities, right? So, oh my goodness, this is the same. This is the same. We have that at home. We have that at home. And that lasts for about 3 months. And then one day I remember distinctly being like, this is nothing like home. This is nothing like it at all. And so then the real process begins of basically assimilating into the culture. And, even the language, even though we both speak English, there's so many different words that have different terms, sweaters and jumpers, rubbish and trash, and all these things. And so you kind of slowly have to adapt to that. And then, of course, you get thrown into high school or middle school, and I'm 6'5" already, right? So I'm tall, and in those days, you really just don't particularly want to stick out, right? And so there you are with this funny accent, with this, past that your typical American doesn't quite understand. And so there you go. I just had to tackle it head on and do the best we could.
Yeah.
Jumped into all the sports I could.
What sports did you jump into?
Well, I've always played soccer since I was a kid in South Africa, but we're very heavy into cricket in South Africa as well, which we lost. So I came and played baseball, played soccer. Just jumped into all that. We played tennis as well.
So you're 6'5" with, I would assume good footwork if you played soccer. I mean, were basketball coaches just begging you to join, or I mean, what was that like?
Until I realized that I did not have a clue how to play that game. So no, it didn't last me very long.
Well, we have that in common. I'm about 6'4", and I think I peaked at basketball in 3rd grade. So
there you go.
Yeah, I had the height, but not much else. So
no, sounds about right.
I guess, what advice would you have like now for say a kid in his teens? Because teens is an awkward age, whether you're born in this country or not. But
Mhm.
if you knew of a family that had a teenage boy moving from South Africa to America, what advice would you tell them?
Well, I think now is a very different time, right? So this was for me, it was pre-internet, right? Pre all of that stuff. Also, South Africa was under heavy sanctions from the United States. And so, you know, a lot of the companies that existed, they left South Africa, right? So the culture shock was probably a lot bigger than it would be today. So
Mm-hmm.
my advice to anybody moving to the States is you're moving to the truly a land of opportunity. You're moving to a country that operates at a different scale than a small country like South Africa or a small country like New Zealand, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why this country is so amazing and the freedoms that exist in the country. And so you're very fortunate, first of all, to have the opportunity. And then once you do, seize the opportunity. And I think a lot of immigrants do. I mean, I was only 13, right? So I went to high school here, went to college here, lived in California for 10 years, all that kind of good stuff. So for the individual teenager, I would say, just take it head on, do the best you can.
That's good advice. Take it head on, do the best you can. And so you're in high school, you finish that, and then you start, was that at Clemson University?
I did.
Uh, what you know, can you talk to us about what life was like for you as a early college student?
Yeah. Again, a little bit of a culture shock. So choosing to go to Clemson over maybe College of Charleston maybe wasn't the best choice for me personally. Clemson being at the foothills of the Appalachian, heavily agricultural school. Um, but yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed the freedom of being in college. I enjoyed my time there. Um, I've got my nieces there at Clemson now, right? And so it's kind of cool to see it through her eyes again and see what I went through. And now keep in mind, as the plot might thicken a little bit, I took time off and I went back to Africa and I did a trip down
Yeah,
from Kenya to Johannesburg.
yeah, that's what I'm interested in. Like, because sometimes people like I took a quarter off in college and I went to New York City, but I didn't climb mountains. Can you share with our audience what your sabbatical was during college?
Sure. Yeah. So I flew to Nairobi. I was only 19 years old at the time. I don't know how my mom must have been terrified. I don't know how she was okay with me walking out the door and jumping on that airplane and landing in Nairobi at midnight sometime and got myself to the hotel. And then I went and climbed. I met a guide and climbed Kilimanjaro. So it was about, I think, I don't know, 3 or 4 hour drive from Nairobi to get into Tanzania. Then you had to spend some time there acclimatizing. And then we did the climb. And so do the whole climb, come back down. And I met an overland group back in Nairobi. This was all pre-planned. So we had this old ex-German army vehicle that had been converted into what is called a lorry, a lorry to carry people. And we went on. We set off on this adventure, which was about 4.5 months long, to travel all the way from Nairobi. We went up north, up into an area called Magahinga, where we saw the mountain gorillas. I trekked up into the mountains to see the mountain gorillas, which is a trip in itself.
Wow.
And we spent months and months traveling down all the way through Victoria Falls and ultimately down to Zimbabwe. And so we once I got into Zimbabwe, I caught up with an uncle of mine who was a wildlife veterinarian out there. He had a wildlife practice and a farm practice. And I went and lived with him for a couple months and then caught up with some people and went off to Mozambique for some time, which is a trip in itself. That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. What was Mozambique like?
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. What was really striking for me is that it's listed as one of the poorest countries in the world, of course. But when you meet the people, it's only really poor by currency standards. It's not really poor by farming standards or food standards. At least where we were in this area called the Beira Pass. There might be other areas that are maybe more hard hit, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like a step back in time, a little bit like going to Cuba, because
Okay.
when it was the Portuguese that pulled out of Mozambique, they kind of ruined the infrastructure on their way out too. And so yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful country. If you get to the coastline in Mozambique, which not a lot of people get to travel to, but it's rich in seafood, rich in culture, rich in people. It's a very cool place.
Yeah, get to the coastline of Mozambique if you can, folks. So,
Yeah.
I have kind of a fear of heights, and one way to get over it or help contain it is going to mountains, or taking ski trams, or just kind of exposing myself to heights and kind of learning to deal with it. Were you actually like scaling the mountain? Like, I guess what was the highest elevation you reached at Mount Kilimanjaro?
What is Kilimanjaro? Something 21,000 feet.
Something
Um,
like that.
yeah. And so, no, what you really are doing is you're hiking for 4 days, right, to get to the top. And I think if I remember correctly, you're down in two or down in two and a half. But what's really interesting is that you travel through four distinct ecosystems on your way up. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to remember them all, but it's basically a rainforest at the bottom full of howler monkeys and all sorts of activity. Then it goes into this kind of, I think it was basically like heather land, scrub grass. Then it goes into almost desert, and then it goes into glacier. So I think I got one of the worst sunburns I've ever gotten.
Yeah.
Because you're just slogging, and there's a saying they call it poli poli, which
Holy
means
moly.
yeah, which means slowly, slowly, and that's how you combat altitude sickness,
Oh.
right? And so you're slogging, and then on the night that you go for the summit, you actually try to sleep. No one was sleeping, but you leave at midnight and get to the summit at sunrise.
Wow.
So I made it to the crater rim, and I was sick. The altitude definitely got me. So I made it up to the crater rim, which was beautiful, wonderful. There is a higher point at the very top of the crater,
Mhm.
but I was good with where I was.
Like, we'll
So,
call this a day.
yeah, it's not exactly the place that you want to collapse or be helpless, right? So you've got to make some good decisions. And so it was a wonderful journey, though. I
I
learned a
mean,
lot. I still rely on it on days when I'm having a tough day, and I think, man, this is really tough. I just remember, hey, I also climbed Kilimanjaro. That was
you're like, I'm not out at 20,000 feet. Yeah, I mean, did you have mountaineering or climbing experience before you did this?
no, just
I
sense of
mean, you
adventure.
can start on a small, maybe go to Mammoth Mountain or something. You don't have to.
I did climb Mount Langley as well. That was a cool
Okay.
one. It's in the Sierra Nevada, so I've climbed that as well. But just a fair amount of outdoor activity, right? And that was on my list. I just decided one day that this is something I wanted to do. I thought it would be cool, and I didn't realize, being now I look back and being 19 and naive sometimes is an awesome thing. It stops you from saying no to stuff.
Oh, 100%. It's like the classic entrepreneur saying, like, no business would get started if you knew how much work was involved. It's kind of similar if you're 19. Like, if you had the wisdom that you do now, you probably wouldn't have done half the things you did at 19, but you're better because you did.
Yeah, and I got a lot of questions like, well, weren't you scared? Or before I was going, aren't you scared? And actually, fear was not one of the emotions that I felt in that whole setting up that whole trip. Of course, there was excitement, and maybe the excitement translated to nervousness, but I wasn't fearful, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, so it was excitement. And what other emotions do you remember from that trip?
Well, I think that there's a fair amount of growing up that you do on a trip like that too. So my trip culminated ultimately by getting to Johannesburg. I took a really amazing train from Zimbabwe down to Johannesburg, and I remember my uncle picking me up late at night from the Johannesburg train station, which isn't the safest of places to be late at night by any stretch of the imagination. But within a few days of getting to Johannesburg, two of my childhood friends, with three of them, we all met up at my grandmother's house, jumped in the car, and we were heading down. Gosh, I don't even remember where we were going, but we got into a car accident that
Oh,
absolutely, changed and shaped my life. I broke my femur, broke my shoulder. We all survived, but they had to cut the roof off to get us. And, here I am, 19 in South Africa by myself, going through this whole surgery and whatnot. And so that was a shaping moment for me in my life.
I
Maybe
like how nonchalantly you're like, oh, yeah, I got in a car crash, broke my shoulder femur, and had to have the jaws of life effectively. Like, pull me
Yeah.
out like a sardine. But yeah, it shaped me. I'm very
Well, it probably still drives Danielle crazy because we only own safe cars. I don't want the kids in anything that isn't, solid, right? So I know what it's like to come to a screeching stop at 80 miles an hour. That,
I bet. So
yeah.
you have this like kind of adventure of a lifetime in Africa. What was it like when you returned to the States? Like how did you readjust?
Well, I returned to the States and went straight to Clemson for the first time. And so there I was with a broken leg. So I was still on crutches. I was on crutches for like 9 months or so. And I was waiting for this to heal. Again, knew some friends, plenty of friends from high school, but just like a big college, everybody's split off in multiple directions. And so, yeah, that first semester at Clemson was weird. I didn't fully get it. It took me a little while to settle in. And so once I did, it was all good. I joined the rugby team at Clemson. It was just a varsity sport. It wasn't not like the football team by any stretch. Um, but did that, and then California was calling, so I ended
Yeah,
up.
I want to hear about that. So you dreamt about working with animals, and then that took you to California. What's the deal there?
Yeah, we went we went to California. It wasn't really for. We went to California, went to San Diego to
Oh,
see about what options there were for with the San Diego Zoo. I was always enthralled with the elephants there. Being from Africa, I thought that that's
mhm.
really where I wanted to be. But ultimately, we moved to Santa Cruz, and well, while I was at Clemson, I actually drove cross country, went to Santa Barbara, and worked on a fishing boat out in Santa Barbara for that summer.
Wow.
And then we came back to the girl I was dating at the time. We came back to school. She was at UVA. I was at Clemson. And then we ultimately moved back to California, back to Santa Cruz. She got into the master's program there. So I actually left Clemson early and um, went to California. And I started a job at a nursery, plant nursery, and just absolutely fell in love with the plants. The diversity in Santa Cruz is phenomenal, and so I had this really good mentor who kind of took me under his wing and showed me everything about plants, taught me everything about plants, and I ultimately built a business around that. I ended up doing a landscape design business that we built out there together, and it was awesome. It was really really cool. I mean, if you think about what type of business would be a great teacher for you to become a good business person later in life,
Hmm.
the construction industry is great for that because it's so complex. You don't realize that it's complex, but it really is because you've got supply chain issues all the time. You've got labor issues all the time. You've got multiple P&Ls running on multiple projects at multiple times.
Yeah.
So you have to learn how to manage your time. You have to learn how to manage your money. You have to learn how to manage people. You have to learn how to manage customers. You have to learn all of that. And so it's a really, really what I would consider a non-insulated business. It's raw.
Hmm.
It's a raw business. When it rains, you don't work. And so you're stressed out because you're not working. Then it's sunny, so you are working and you're stressed out because you're working. And so it's got all of the dynamics of a business. And so we built that business up to a couple $1 million in revenue. Then
Wow.
2008 came along and it was like kind of like a wet blanket that just went over all of the United States, right? In
Yeah,
terms
all,
of
all these people who had money before aren't, creating these beautiful landscapes in their
very.
backyard.
And one thing I didn't realize is that really all of their money was coming from the equity of their homes,
Mm.
right? And so, when the equity dries up, so does all of the home improvement activity. And
So,
so
so
that was good. It was good. One of the best life lessons I've ever had, to be honest with you, was the 2008 market crash. It taught me. I went into it very naive, very
mhm.
unknown, and I came out of it with a whole new appreciation for business.
Well, I was not expecting you to say that was one of the best things that happened to you, but it
Yeah.
sounds like it was. And so you're no longer running a landscaping business. It's quite different. What was your next job, so to speak?
Well, the next job was I went back to school um, for business school, and that wasn't academia has not been my strong suit. It's not something I've really enjoyed, but I felt like I just needed to do that, so I went for a business degree, got that, But while I was doing business school, I also came up with a thesis of the perfect type of business that I would like to start and create. And so it really had 4 points to that type of business. It was recurring revenue, but back in 2009, there wasn't a lot of recurring revenue businesses. It was kind of new to the idea stream, right? But I wanted recurring revenue. I wanted high automation, low employee count, and high margins. And so when you look at businesses through that lens, you look at restaurants, you look at other construction businesses, or maybe publishing businesses, or anything that might be in the subscription space, like newspapers. And ultimately, IT was the perfect space for that model. And so I was working with my dad at the time, who's an accountant, and I looked at his IT infrastructure, and it's like, there's got to be a better way. And sure enough, built a company around it, and was called Cloud Aspects. We built that company up and delivering QuickBooks and other financial applications over the network effectively. In those days, we were still just kind of like figuring it all out. And so we built Cloud Aspects, and then within 8 months, one of our competitors asked if we wanted to merge, and we said, I looked at the opportunity of merging and did that, merged the companies together. And then we just grew like mad. We grew the next 4 years to like $5 million in sales. And so when you think about the learning lessons in that whole process, when you're thinking about it purely from an operation standpoint, it's like putting shoes on a kid. You can't get them just the right size because they're going to outgrow them. You can't get them too big because they're going to trip. So you kind of had to, every system and process we've had to put in place was just big enough that we could fit into it, but not too big that we didn't relate to us, and certainly not the right size that we needed. And so we had to just keep scaling the business to keep up with the demand and keep up with the really just the size of the business and its own growth rate.
So you scaled it to the right size, and then what are some of the lessons you learned from when it went to that size to where it is now, and what I guess what would you want to convey to entrepreneurs? Yeah. Okay. Also,
well, the first 5 million is a slog, right? Because you're not working on the business, you're working in the business, right? You're very much so. You're focused on every process. If you're a true entrepreneur, I can see situations where that might not be true. Like if you're not needing to bootstrap the business, then you might have the resources to pull in the different people that you might need. But when you're bootstrapping a business as a young entrepreneur, you're wearing every single hat. There's not a single part of that business that you don't do. And that was true for me. So from the accounting to the sales to the infrastructure, to dealing with employees, to learning how to employ people. That's a master craft on its own, and how to keep good employees and what the expectations you set for them. So you learn all of that. You basically make all of your good mistakes. You just make them, and you make them, and you make them, and you make them. And then the business does start. The analogy I use for a lot of the young entrepreneurs that I talk to is it's kind of like building a bonfire on the beach. Okay. When the fire is little, it needs a lot of love and care, and you got to give it air, and you got to feed it wood, and you got to nurture it. But once it gets a little bit bigger, you just throw in a log on every now and then. Building a business can be similar to that, but that first 5 million you got to fight for. But once you've got that infrastructure beneath you, the next 5 million is a little bit easier, and the next 5 million, and the next 5 million. And ultimately, I'd say, and this has been very, very true for me, is that I've been fortunate enough to surround myself with people that are way smarter than me and way better at doing these things than me. And so that's what probably makes it a lot easier, is that you've got some really amazing talent. Our CTO, our CRO, our CFO, our managers that run the company now, they're phenomenal. They're phenomenal individuals. They're skilled at their craft. They understand that making mistakes is the best way to learn. So it's not a punitive environment. It's, make that mistake and move on. And so that journey from 5 and up does get easier. At least in my case, it was true.
Nice. Well, you brought up lots of good points, but one is, how to keep employees. Obviously, people always think of pay. That's an obvious one. But what advice would you have on how to retain good employees?
It's interesting because my managers hear me humming, drumming about this all the time. So none of this will be new to them. But first and foremost, treat people like adults. right? First and foremost. Secondly, don't manage to the lowest common denominator. That's one of the mistakes I think that happens when a company gets too big, is that you're always managing to that bad apple.
Okay.
We don't do that. So we treat people like adults. We get the best benefits we can. We buy the best health insurance. We do sabbaticals. We do 401k matching. Try to create an environment that they feel valued and respected. And that goes a long way. It goes a long, long, long way. You tend to get the best work out of everybody. And the other thing is, we run a results-oriented company. So where manager X might think, well, this employee comes in early every day and leaves late every night, that's my best employee.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see the world through that lens. I actually kind of like the employees that get their job done in a shorter period of time. They don't need to sit there looking at the clock and waiting for other stuff. So that helps with employees too. Don't tell them how to get from point A to point B. Set the goal of what point B looks like and let them go. Let them discover how to get there. Let them make mistakes. Let them find out and grow and become better at their craft along the way.
I love that because it gives a uniqueness to the job. No one likes to be told do step A through Z. It's like, here's what we want to do. However you need to do it, it's on you. And then it makes them feel like adults, but it also gives them a lot of autonomy over the schedule. So I think that's smart.
It does. And then also, basic principles like being a good human, that goes a long way, right? Just be a good person. Mm-hmm. And we've got, I don't know, 80 plus employees now, and we're about to double that in short order. But, that's not a lot of people. And so there's limited numbers of seats on the bus. And so you really want good people on the bus. And you also want people that are coming to work and bringing their best ideas at play.
Yeah.
I just always encourage personal growth. And so do our managers. My expectation for them is that they're helping the team members that may be below them on the organizational chart, where they're helping them become better.
Yeah, I mean, if they're growing and becoming better within an organization, they're going to be less tempted to try to leave for a different firm.
I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that. I know it sounds unconventional. I'm okay to be a stepping stone for somebody on their way. I'd much rather have somebody that has some directionality in their own, for their own heart, than someone, that just wants to come and park and get a free ride. I'm totally fine with being a stepping stone, and I encourage it to a certain degree. I mean, I want to see these guys do well.
That's surprising. I mean, that makes sense. Like a lot of like in show business, that's often the case. Like someone will come in as an assistant, but the ultimate goal is to be a director. But you have to
we've got a lot of that in the IT space. Our frontline guys, that's where they're cutting their teeth and getting to know the business. Hopefully, wanting to one day be in security or be in networking and stuff like that. And I would be that gateway for anybody. I'd be happy to do that.
Wonderful. And I'm curious, Warren, you've done a lot of very impressive things in your career. What are you most proud of career-wise?
I think I'm proud of the environment that's been created at Summit. I really am. I think I'm proud of the way that that this next layer of management that's coming up, the way that they're handling themselves, the way that they're handling the growth of the company, and the fact that everybody's remote. So we've got a remote workforce. We're results oriented. We've got a very flat organizational structure. Everybody's encouraged to make decisions. They're not allowed to burn the house down, but they're allowed to make decisions. And those conventional or those pieces, you would think that they would get eroded as the company gets bigger, but actually they're the glue that's helping the business get bigger. So we call it the gravitational pull. We're fighting against the gravitational pull of being corporate. We don't want to be corporate, right? And everybody chuckles inside the company when we talk about it, because we don't want to, we just don't, that's not who we are. We're remote, we're results oriented. And so we do have to fight the gravitational pull, because a lot of times you'll hear, well, this is how they do it, and so that's how we should do it. Whereas I would rather pause and say that I know that that's how they do it, but is that the right way? Is that the best way? Or could we think about it from a different angle?
Nice.
And that's very helpful. And believe me, it's not just me. our C team is looking at it through the exact same lens, which is wonderful.
Very cool. I'm curious, Warren, what are you most optimistic about?
I think I'm an extremely optimistic person to begin with. Yeah, from an optimistic standpoint, we're gonna hit all the goals that we're setting for ourselves. Come hell or high water, we're gonna get them. Right? We're gonna fight through it and get to those points. But I'm optimistic about Summit living and breathing in the future. It's not, if we keep being good stewards of the business and steering it in the right directions, it's a business that can continue on well into the future. So I'm optimistic about Summit's own future.
I share optimism because I like the leader they have. Where can people learn more about you, what you're up to? Like, where all these hundreds of millions of people that are tuning in, where should we funnel them, Warren?
Right. Well, you can check out our new website, Summit's website. We went through a recent rebranding, which was really done very well. Super happy with the whole logo there. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. I don't have a very loud public persona out there, but LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me, and you can see more about Summit on our websites and learn more about what we do as a company. And we're building something really incredibly special. We're not just building a company that's 100% revenue based. It's more than that. It's about delivering really, really good products, having really, really good people, and making a difference in whatever it is that we're building.
Summit's making a difference. So you hear that, folks? Go check it out, learn more about them, support Summit. Warren Patterson, thank you so much for joining us. I hope to have you back soon.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.